In 1403, a 16-year-old boy took an arrow to the face. It went in beside his nose, punched straight through bone, and buried itself 6 inches deep into the back of his skull. There was no anesthetic, no antibiotics, no way to even see the metal head still lodged inside him. By every rule of his century, that boy should have died screaming of infection within the week. Instead, he lived. And 12 years later, he went on to win the most famous battle in English history. So here is the real question, and I want you to actually sit with it. If that were you on the table with a blade or an arrow buried in your body and death already creeping in, could you survive a medieval battle wound? Start with what is actually in you, because the things trying to kill you on that field were designed to get inside and stay there. A war arrow did not have a neat little point. The bodkin was a long, narrow spike built to punch clean through armor. The broadhead was a wide blade with barbs, and those barbs gripped your flesh so it could not be pulled straight back out the way it went in. A sword did not simply cut you. A heavy blade swung with 2 hands could shatter the bone underneath the skin. And then there was the mace and the war hammer, which did not even need to break your skin to turn what was inside you to pulp. But here's the part almost everyone gets wrong. The wound itself, the actual hole in your body, very often was not the thing that killed you. Men survived losing fingers. They survived losing ears, chunks of scalp, even an eye, and walked around for another 40 years. What killed you came later. It was smaller than an arrowhead, it was completely invisible, and it is the real monster of this story. Keep it in the back of your mind, because I promise you we are coming back to it. So who is treating you? Not a doctor in the way you would think of one. On most battlefields, the man kneeling over you was a barber-surgeon. The same trade that cut hair and trimmed beards also set bones, pulled teeth, and dug out arrows, because they were the ones who owned the sharp tools and were not afraid to use them on a living body. The red and white pole outside a barbershop is a leftover from exactly this. Red for the blood, white for the bandages. So the person deciding whether you live might have been shaving a customer that same morning. First, he has to get the metal out of you. And this is where it gets grim. If an arrow drove into you and the wooden shaft snapped off, you now had an iron head sitting deep in your body, and every clumsy attempt to dig it out did more damage than the arrow had done going in. Sometimes the least destructive option was to push the arrow all the way through and out the other side, rather than drag those barbs back through everything they had already torn. Sit with that for a second. The treatment was to shove the arrow deeper. The clever surgeons did better than that. One of them built a tool for exactly this problem, and it was genuinely brilliant. Picture a pair of smooth metal tongs, thin enough to slide down the exact channel the arrow had carved. First, they widened that channel over several days using rolls of linen soaked in honey. Then they worked the tongs down to the arrowhead, threaded a screw into the hollow socket of the head, spread the tongs so they gripped it from the inside, and slowly, carefully, worked it loose. That is real. Someone invented a screw device to pull an arrowhead out of a human body 600 years ago, and it worked. But you had to be lucky enough to have a surgeon that good, and most men were not. Now let us talk about the thing you have been dreading since the start. The pain. Because none of this happened while you were peacefully asleep. There was no clean anesthetic that reliably put a person under. What they had was crude, and it was dangerous. There was a mixture called dwale, and the recipe actually survives. It blended things like opium, the juice of hemlock, and henbane, all real, all powerful, and all poisonous in the wrong amount. It might dull you enough to survive the knife. It might also simply stop your heart. Drinking it was a gamble that the cure would not kill you faster than the wound. So for most men, with most wounds, the honest answer is that you were awake for it. You bit down on a strap of leather. Others held your arms and your legs against the table, and you felt the knife and the tongs and the needle, all of it. If you have ever quietly wondered whether you are tough enough for a moment like that, well, that is the moment that answers the question. And here is the monster I promised you. Say you survive the weapon. You survive them digging it out of you. You are stitched, you are bandaged, and you let yourself believe the worst is finally behind you. It is not. Because over the next few days, the wound goes hot. It swells. It begins to smell. And thin red lines start creeping up your arm, toward your heart. That is infection. And in the Middle Ages, infection is the thing that turned survivable wounds into funerals. There were no antibiotics coming for another 500 years. A shallow cut that went bad could kill you just as dead as a spear through the chest. The soldiers knew it. The surgeons knew it. Everyone understood that the real battle began after the fighting had already stopped. So what did they actually do about it? And this is the genuinely surprising part because some of it worked. They packed wounds with honey, and that was not superstition. Honey really does kill bacteria. Hospitals still use medical-grade honey on stubborn wounds today. Those healers had stumbled onto real medicine 6 centuries early without knowing why it worked. Then there is the one that makes people squirm. Maggots. If a wound was already rotting, a medieval healer might deliberately let fly larvae feed inside it. It sounds like a nightmare. But the maggots eat only the dead, infected flesh, and leave the healthy tissue completely alone. It cleans the wound better than a blade could. Doctors still use it right now, and they call it therapy. The medieval version just did not have the marketing, and when they needed to stop heavy bleeding or seal a wound fast, they reached for the iron. A cauterizing iron heated in the fire until it glowed, then pressed straight onto the raw wound. It burned the flesh, it sealed the vessels shut, and yes, it hurt every bit as much as you are picturing right now. But it could be the difference between bleeding out on the floor and walking away on your own 2 legs. And if the rot had already set in too deep, then you were down to the last, worst option. The limb had to come off, and it had to come off fast because the longer it took, the less chance you had of surviving the shock. A good surgeon could take a leg in under a minute. Think about that number for a second. The whole plan was speed, because there was nothing to dull it and no time to be gentle. If you lived through that, the same glowing iron was waiting to seal what was left. Now, you may have heard the story about surgeons pouring boiling oil into open wounds. That one is real, but it is not medieval. That belongs to a later century and a surgeon named Ambroise Paré, who actually discovered by accident that the soldiers he did not scald with hot oil healed better than the ones he did. So if you have been picturing your medieval knight getting a face full of boiling oil, that is the wrong era entirely. Your problems were quite bad enough without it. So, could you survive a medieval battle wound? Honestly, it came down to 3 things: where you were hit, because a wound to the arm or the leg was survivable, and a wound to the gut almost never was. Whether the person treating you actually knew their craft, because a skilled surgeon could work a miracle, while a panicking amateur could finish what the enemy had started. And luck. Pure, blind luck on whether that wound stayed clean, or turned into the invisible killer creeping up your arm. Some men beat all 3. They took an arrow, survived the surgery wide awake, dodged the infection that killed everyone around them, and walked away to fight another day. Most men on that field were not nearly so lucky. And that boy from the very start of this video, he beat all 3. His name was Henry, and he was the son of the King of England, which meant he had the one thing almost no common soldier did: the best surgeon in the country kneeling over him. A man named John Bradmore widened the wound over days, drew the arrowhead out with a screw device he had built for the job, and packed the hole with honey so it would not turn. Against every expectation, it healed. 12 years later, that same boy, now King Henry V, stood on a muddy field at Agincourt, his army outnumbered and half of it sick, and his archers cut the French to pieces. It became the most famous victory in English history. He almost died from a wound to the face at 16, and he became a legend at 28. Most men on that field never got the chance. If this is the kind of history you want more of, the strange, brutal, occasionally brilliant reality behind the stories, then subscribe, and I'll have another one waiting for you. Until then, be glad you were born when you were. See you next time.